Alright, so this panel that I brought in earlier, this is already the same size as my objects back in Maya. If I go to update my scene, update current scene, it'll bring in that texture and it'll allow me to use that texture over and over. Now again, this texture is pretty well hid on your hard drive, so I don't like that. I want to edit the texture, and look at that. Isn't that beautiful? Now if you watch the other series of me doing textures within Photoshop, it's just the exact same workflow, and in this case I just had to click it a few times and there it was. Sure, I might have to make a few custom brushes, but again, I'll probably be using those over and over again. I can save this image and save it to somewhere that I know where it's at. Like, let's say under the class I was developing for, let's say this 245 inside stuff, and we can call this a targa file and call it steel. Okay, then we can go to my computer, desktop, so now I have a copy of that in here. It's not in a hidden location, and I can click and drag it in, and I can get rid of this variation right here. I can just click on it and hit delete. It gets rid of it. Notice this has made 1,000 different Lamberts. I want to get all those out of here too. That's probably wrecked a few of the meshes, but that's okay. I'll make a Lambert, and middle mouse button click and drag this to the color channel, and there we go. We got a fresh, brand new texture that we can add to things. Look how high res that is. Wow. Okay, let's add it to our pieces. Now, even as small as it is, it's still pretty blurry. Look at that. And that's under high quality rendering. And the reason for that is if you look under the UV texture editor, you'll find out that I'm only utilizing a little bit of this map. Because, you know, the bigger this thing gets, the higher res it gets. And right about there is where I want it to be. I like that. That looks really nice to me. This, not so much. This, great. So how do we get that level of detail onto these things and still maintain them? Well, the secret is size. So in Mudbox, instead of using a giant brush like this, let me use randomize and use this feature where it says rotate. And I'm going to just take a few seconds to use this little tiny brush to kind of scrub across this surface a few thousand times. And I know it looks like it has a pattern here, but the thing is, it's a really small pattern. Okay, so let's see what we got now. Now before I do the whole workflow of saving that texture out, I'll just see what it looks like this time. Update current scene. So there's that texture. And let's add that new texture to these objects. I do that by finding out what texture that really is. It is Lambert 4. And if I go edit, delete by type history, it'll help me a little bit more. So I got Lambert flatten diffuse, Lambert 4. So here's Lambert 4. Okay, that looks good. And that's what I'm looking for right there. See how detailed that is? It's a little bit lighter, but there's no pattern here. None that I can distinguish anyway. Very nice. Alright, I like the quality of the texture. I don't like how light the texture is. So to darken that, I would probably do that in another program. That way you can darken it all the way across very evenly. Okay, so let's think about that for a second. Now, under layers, there's this layer right here, this paint layer. And if you page down, you get all this good stuff. But right now, you can say export channel to Photoshop. And this will save it somewhere in the center. Let's say here under Data Mudbox. And then bring it right into Photoshop. And then in Photoshop, we can darken it. We can do that using exposure. I notice, let me undo that. I notice if I do that though, I have to make sure that it all stays on this one layer flattened. So image adjustment exposure works better than having the layer properties. So I'll darken that up. And I can even sharpen it here. So let's go sharpen, smart sharpen. Not that much. Let's just sharpen it a little bit, just like that. And then we'll save it. Okay, now if I remember right, you can say re-import steel texture. It'll be darker and sharper. And I can close it. So that's how we can update the texture, and how we update the scene back in Maya is say I update current scene. And there we go. We have a darker variation of that steel now. Alright, now we can use this across all these meshes. It would get very boring. But I'm just going to plop it onto most of these meshes to see what it looks like. Okay, that one doesn't like to go under Lambert 4. But they do like to go individually. Weird. And you can see that if I use this texture over and over again on all these objects, yeah, it would get very boring. Now, don't forget, this is going to be developed for an engine though, so the idea of ambient occlusion comes into play, where ambient occlusion will darken areas of the mesh automatically for you within the game engine. So you don't have to in Maya. We used to call this texture baking, and it used to be one of my things I used to do all the time is texture bake everything. Now I've learned that the ambient occlusion is real time, so we can just bring in the flat texture and let the engine take care of it for us. And these are the little guys that are having a little bit of an issue with those. So I bet you anything that normals need to be reversed. error while parsing arguments. So we'll have to look at those a little bit later. That one works. This one doesn't. Get rid of this one. Replace it with this one. Shift D. Alright, yep. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is make a couple variations of the steel so we can use it within our scene. And I have all the ones located on that website, or anything on the internet I want, and or variations thereof. So I got rusty ones and whatever. But the key is I'm going to get them all to the same resolution, and I'll start that process. I'll do one more with you in this workflow and show you how to keep them at the same resolution all the way across in the next video.